They made a mistake with an old man and regretted it for the rest of their lives. Elmswood, a small town in the American Midwest, was entering the final days of winter. The biting cold pierced through layers of coats, and the wind howled through the cobblestone streets, sweeping away the last lingering autumn leaves. In front of the old town hall, once the administrative heart since World War II, an old man sat quietly on a worn wooden bench. No one stopped, no one noticed, yet he remained there, a silent part of the city's flow. His name was Walter Harris, 68, a veteran who had served in the U.S. infantry for 16 years. His hair was stark white, his face deeply lined by time and war. He wore a thick, faded coat and a dark wool scarf around his neck, knitted by his wife several winters ago. In his hands was a discolored American flag, one that had once flown over a barracks in Fallujah. Next to him on the bench lay an old photo frame, a black and white picture of two young soldiers, arms around each other, a rare smile amidst a place filled with smoke and fire. One of them was him, the other was Sergeant Jonathan Miller, the closest combat friend he ever had. Today marked the 5th anniversary of Jonathan's passing, and as an unbroken promise, Walter returned to this very spot, in front of the town hall, where their unit's flag once hung. But in recent years, that flag had been replaced by a modern symbol, and no one mentioned the 325 battalion they once belonged to. Only Walter remembered. He didn't come to demand anything, not to complain or blame. He simply wanted to sit for a few hours, recalling memories that no one else understood. He told Jonathan about his back aching more these days, about his grandchild who had just been accepted into the Navy, and how he still kept the letter Jonathan wrote from the trenches, a letter that was never sent. Walter didn't need attention or pity. He just needed a small corner, a quiet moment, where he could commemorate his fallen friend, the one he had promised. If you don't come back, I will always remember you. Always speak your name to this world. The winter afternoon slowly descended, the weak sunlight casting a faint golden glow over the town hall. But where Walter sat, there was a different light, silent, steadfast, like the very loyalty he held for his dear friend, unwavering for over 3 decades. The twilight began to fade in the Elmswood sky. On the cold pavement in front of the town hall, Walter Harris still sat quietly, his face pensive, his eyes seemingly gazing into a distant past. His calloused fingers gently traced the glass of the photo frame, his gaze softening each time it rested on his old friend's smile. However, that tranquility was soon broken by hurried footsteps and a stern voice from behind. "Excuse me, sir, but this area is not permitted for extended sitting after business hours. You need to leave now." Walter turned around. A young police officer, his face still boyish, his uniform still with new creases. Grant, 26, only 6 months on the force. Grant stood erect, one hand on his gun belt, his eyes full of suspicion as he looked at the old man in the faded canvas bag next to him. "The police chief has ordered tightened security around the town hall. We've been instructed to deal with all unauthorized gatherings, especially cases like yours," Grant said, his voice perfectly standard, but his eyes held a hint of disdain. Walter looked up, slowly replying, "I'm just sitting here to commemorate an old friend. Today marks his 5th anniversary. We served together in the military, and he never came back." Grant frowned, stepping back slightly, perhaps surprised by the old man's calm, resolute voice. But then he looked at his watch and shook his head. "I understand, but rules are rules. You're not allowed to sit in a public area after 5 p.m. without a valid reason." Walter smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had heard rigid orders before, someone who understood the indifference that takes over when reason overrides the heart. "Do you know which unit's flag used to hang on this building?" he asked, his voice slow. 325. I fought under that flag. That boy, the one in the picture, died keeping it from falling." Grant was silent for a few seconds, his eyes wavering. But then he shook his head slightly and turned to his radio, reporting, "I have a subject refusing to comply with orders to vacate the area, possibly a vagrant, requesting backup." Hearing that, Walter subtly clenched his fists. "I'm not a vagrant. I'm a retired soldier. My name is on file with this town's Veterans Affairs Department. I just need 10 more minutes to say goodbye." Grant didn't reply. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice sharper. I'm asking you to stand up now. Otherwise, I'll be forced to proceed under regulations regarding resisting official orders. Walter picked up his cane, slowly standing up. His body was stiff with age. His knees made a soft, creaking sound. But he stood tall, just as he had once done as a sergeant in the dusty battlefield. The moment he staggered slightly, Grant flinched, thinking he was about to run or resist. In a panicked reflex, Grant swung his arm and forcefully pushed him backward. The sudden fall sent Walter's shoulder and head crashing against the cold stone steps behind him, his cane flying away, and the photograph landing face down on the pavement. He lay there gasping for breath, his hands trembling as he tried to push himself up. I just wanted to say goodbye. His voice broke amidst his ragged breaths. Grant was alarmed but tried to maintain a stern demeanor. He pulled handcuffs from his belt and called loudly into his radio. Urgent request. Subject is non-compliant. I've used physical force. Need additional support. Passers-by began to stop. Some were filming. An elderly woman nearby covered her mouth in horror. A young boy pointed and asked his mother, "Why is he being arrested?" "He didn't do anything." Grant knelt down and cuffed Walter's hands behind his back. The old man's frail wrists were tightened by the cold metal. He didn't resist. He just bowed his head, his eyes reflecting a hint of melancholy. In that moment, he saw Jonathan's face appear in his memory, the young soldier who once said, "We'll come back together, or at least you have to live for me." And now, on the very ground that once honored them, he was being treated like a criminal. A drop of blood trickled from his forehead, merging with the fading sunset. A citizen cried out, "He's a veteran! What are you doing?" But Grant still tightened the handcuffs, his eyes mixed with worry and anger. "I'm just doing my job," he shouted, as if to reassure himself. As the sirens of approaching police cars wailed, a story was shifting, not just a conflict between an old man and a police officer, but between indifference and memory, between rigid rules and loyalty, between a modern society and values that had slowly been forgotten. The sound of the photo frame hitting the stone pavement seemed to awaken every sense in Linda Carter, the owner of the bakery across from the town hall. She was a kind woman in her 60s who always set aside a sugar-free apple pie every Tuesday for Walter, knowing he had diabetes but couldn't bear to refuse the pie his late wife used to make. From behind her counter, she saw Officer Grant handcuffing Walter, the old man trembling from being pushed down, blood trickling from his forehead, and his cane lying discarded at the foot of the stairs. Her heart clenched. "Oh my God! No! Not him!" Without hesitation, Linda immediately pulled out her phone and dialed Raymond Beck, a Marine Corps veteran who owned a small auto shop in the neighborhood. Raymond and Walter had stood side by side at veteran memorial events at the Elmswood Community Center. "Ray, get to the town hall now. Walter's being arrested by the police. They pushed him down and they're handcuffing him like he's a criminal. Hurry." That single sentence was enough. Raymond hung up without another word. He ripped off his mechanic's shirt, rushed into the changing room, pulled out his unit emblazoned jacket, and then, as he walked, called 4 more people, old soldiers who had once faced life and death together, now each in different professions: a teacher, a librarian, a security guard, a welder. 13 minutes later, 5 old soldiers arrived at the town hall, standing in a line before the gathering crowd. Each wore an old military jacket or unit insignia, walking unhurriedly but with immense gravity, as if every step honored the man they had come to protect. They weren't yelling, they weren't loud, they just stood there, steadfast as a wall. Raymond stepped to the front of the line, his gaze sharp as he looked at Grant. "What's your name?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was as firm as a command in a barracks. "I'm Officer Grant. I need you gentlemen to step back. This is an active enforcement scene." Raymond smirked, his eyes cold. "Enforcing against a 68-year-old veteran for sitting and commemorating a fallen comrade? Pushing him down, handcuffing him in front of a crowd? Do you know what you just did?" Grant hesitated but tried to keep his voice rigid. He failed to comply with an order to leave an administrative area. "This is a violation." One of the other veterans, Ernie, who had served in Afghanistan, held up his phone, recording the entire scene. Walter lying by the steps, blood trickling from his forehead, hands cuffed behind his back, the broken photo frame lying face down. Raymond didn't turn to look, but he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Call the reporters. Liam, the ex-Navy guy who works for the local station. Let them see how a free country treats its soldiers." The people around them began to gather more densely. Some were already filming with, "You're not alone." Walter tried to smile, though he was still trembling from the cold and shock. "I just wanted to say goodbye." Raymond took his hand. "You will, in front of this entire town." The crowd behind them chanted, "Free the soldier! Don't insult our veterans!" The city's police chief, upon hearing the news, immediately left headquarters and drove straight to the scene. He was a Gulf War veteran, and the moment he saw the sight before him, he froze. "Take his handcuffs off, immediately!" His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp as a knife. Grant stammered, "But I determined that it was." Here's the English translation of your passage. You didn't determine anything. You insulted a soldier this entire town respects. The handcuffs clanged onto the stone pavement, the jarring sound like a slap to the arrogance of a mechanical system. And it was also a wake-up call for those who had forgotten gratitude. The shouts from the crowd, the clicking of cameras, the flashing lights of the media, all created a chaotic but meaningful scene in front of Elmswood Town Hall. In the midst of it, Walter Harris, the 68-year-old veteran, still sat silently on the stone steps, his hands cuffed behind his back, blood trickling from his forehead, yet his gaze remained unbowed. Surrounding him was a protective circle of 5 veterans, comrades he hadn't called, but who had come. Just then, a black SUV with the city's emblem pulled up. The door opened, and out stepped the mayor of Elmswood, along with Police Chief Nathan Cole, a man who had been awarded a medal for heroic actions in the Gulf War. Both walked quickly to the scene, their faces tense, their eyes scanning the scene before stopping on Walter, as if recognizing a familiar figure. Nathan paused. He whispered, "Walter Harris? It can't be." Then he turned to the subordinate officer beside him. "Take his handcuffs off." Immediately, Officer Grant, who had just caused all the commotion, stammered, "But sir, I thought he was a homeless person loitering illegally. I was just following procedure." Nathan cut him off, his voice colder than the winter wind. "You didn't think anything. You didn't check his reason, didn't verify his identification, didn't assess an elderly person's health condition. You acted like a robot, and you just handcuffed a decorated soldier right where he was commemorating a fallen comrade." Grant hung his head. His hands trembled as he took out the key and stepped forward to remove the handcuffs. The sound of metal hitting the stone echoed amidst the murmurs and the silence that enveloped them. The entire crowd erupted in applause. An old man nearby raised his veteran's hat high, shouting, "Welcome our hero!" Walter was helped to his feet by Raymond and Ernie. Police Chief Nathan stepped forward, saying little, simply giving a solemn military salute. Walter nodded in return, his eyes brimming with tears. The mayor then spoke, his voice projected through a handheld mic given by a reporter. "Dear citizens of Elmswood, we have just witnessed an unfortunate incident. A soldier who sacrificed for our nation was mistreated right in the place he once protected. After reviewing security footage, witness testimonies, and funeral records, we confirm Mr. Walter Harris did not violate any regulations. He was here to commemorate a fallen comrade who sacrificed for our country. On behalf of the city government, I publicly apologize to Mr. Harris, to his family, and to the entire veteran community of Elmswood." A resounding applause erupted. Linda, the baker, wiped away tears. People held up small flags. Some softly sang, "God bless America." Nathan turned to Officer Grant, stating firmly, "You are immediately suspended from duty, pending a full investigation into abuse of power and unnecessary use of force. Turn over your badge and weapon to me." Grant hung his head, slowly removing his police ID, taking off his gun, and handing them over. No one in the crowd booed, but their eyes were the heaviest judgment he had ever received in his life. A medical vehicle was called. A nurse helped Walter onto a chair, checking the wound on his forehead. Although he repeatedly said, "I'm fine," his trembling voice couldn't hide his condition. Police Chief Nathan placed a hand on his shoulder, saying softly, "You don't have to be strong anymore, Walter. Today is a day for others to stand up for you." As the medical vehicle prepared to leave, the crowd formed an honor guard. 4 veterans accompanied the vehicle, saluting as the door closed. Cameras recorded every moment. On social media, the live stream video was spreading with the title, "The Entire City Stands Up for an Old Soldier." Liam, the reporter and former Navy man, turned to the camera and said, "We talk about America as the land of the free, but freedom doesn't come from laws. It comes from respect. Respect for those who have shed sweat, tears, and even blood to preserve that freedom. And today, Elmswood has shown the entire nation. We do not forget." 3 days later, in front of Elmswood Town Hall Square, the atmosphere was completely different from the day of the incident. No sirens, no arguments, just the gentle morning sunlight, bird song, and the gentle flutter of the national flag in the breeze. People began to gather, but this time in reverence. On the steps, exactly where Walter had once sat beside the framed photo and been misunderstood, a small wooden podium was erected, draped in red, white, and blue. Beside it stood a new black granite memorial stone, inscribed with gleaming words, "Sergeant Jonathan Miller, our fallen brother." No one left behind. Just above, the flag of the 325 unit, the unit that Walter and Jonathan had fought with, had been restored and raised on a secondary flagpole. The flag was faded, but every fold seemed to preserve the traces of the history they had endured. The ceremony was simply called a memorial service, but for those present, it was more sacred than any Veterans Day parade. The mayor, Police Chief Nathan, the veterans, the citizens, all were there. And Walter Harris, in a simple vest with his old medals pinned to his left chest, stepped up to the podium. Though his steps were slow and he needed his cane, when he stood straight on the podium, he seemed to return to the sergeant he once was. Shoulders square, eyes direct, his voice deep and warm like the echo of a desert night fire. He began, "I am not here to demand justice for myself, because I at least can still speak." He paused for a beat, his gaze resting on the stone inscribed with Jonathan's name. "But there are those who lie beneath the earth, in the hot sand, where no camera or social media ever recorded. They no longer have a voice, and we, the survivors, have a responsibility to preserve their honor." A gentle breeze swept through. Some in the crowd bowed their heads in silence. Others wiped away tears. 3 days ago, I thought, maybe I had become invisible, an old man with no home, no value. But then I saw Raymond, Ernie, Linda, this town, all stood up, not for me, but for something greater, the belief that honor is inviolable. He paused, pulled a small letter from his pocket, and gently placed it on top of the stone memorial. Jonathan once said, "If I fall, you must live and tell the story." Today I do that, not to be pitied, but to remind us not to forget. Below, the crowd rose in unison. No one spoke. They simply raised their hands in a silent military salute. Even those who had never worn a uniform, they too raised their hands, slowly and with deep respect. The 325 unit flag was raised to the top of the pole. The somber yet majestic sound of taps echoed from the back of the square. Walter stood silently, one hand over his heart, his eyes closed. In his mind, perhaps Jonathan's image was smiling, sitting beside him, just like that day in the distant Iraqi desert. At the end of the ceremony, the mayor announced, "From today forward, March 12th of every year will be Miller Harris Memorial Day in Elmswood, to honor the soldiers who sacrificed and those who lived to keep that memory alive." A girl of about 10 approached Walter, handing him a crude drawing. 2 soldiers standing side by side, beside an American flag, with "Thank you for not forgetting" written below. He bent down, slowly taking it, his eyes brimming with unhidden tears. Here's the English translation of your passage. Days later, a quiet reflection. A few days later, Grant, the young police officer, was seen sitting alone on a stone bench near the town hall, exactly where Walter had once sat. No longer in uniform, no longer wearing his badge, he was in plain clothes, his eyes quietly fixed on the newly placed memorial stone. Linda walked by and recognized him. Without a word, she simply handed Grant a small pastry in a brown paper bag. He took it, bowing his head slightly as he said, "I was wrong, and I'm learning to understand what respect means, not by order, but by heart." The story ended there. No dramatic conclusion needed, because the truth had been revealed, honor had been restored, and the community had sided with what was right. In an increasingly noisy and polarized world, Elmswood, a small town, showed the entire nation that when a soldier falls, their honor lies not in their uniform, but in how we remember them. The enduring spirit of Elmswood. Elmswood returned to its peaceful days. Children played in the park. Linda's bakery was busier than usual. Outside the town hall, the Jonathan Miller Memorial Stone lay silently under the afternoon sun, like an invisible guardian watching over the community's honor. Walter Harris still visited that spot every week, not to mourn, but to sit, contemplate, and thank life for showing him one thing. Honor isn't in the uniform, but in how society treats those who once sacrificed. The day he was pushed down, handcuffed, and blood stained the stone steps, his honor seemed to shatter, but it didn't. What helped him rise again wasn't his personal strength, but the community's response. The baker made a call. A group of veterans came to his side without a promise. Citizens left their dinners and their children's after-school activities just to stand around an old soldier, forming a protective embrace without slogans. Because they understood one thing. When a soldier is insulted, the entire community needs to speak up, because silence is also a form of betrayal. No one wears a uniform forever, but values should never be shed. Grant, the young police officer who had misunderstood and made a mistake, after that incident, requested a transfer to civilian duties, joining a veteran support program. No one forced him to do so. No one coerced him, but he chose it himself. One day, Walter met Grant at the community clinic. Grant was helping an elderly man fill out forms for free health exams for veterans. Catching Walter's eye, he stood at attention and bowed his head slightly. "I'm learning to be worthy of what I didn't understand." Walter placed a hand on his shoulder, his eyes free of reproach. "The valuable thing isn't that you were wrong, but that you dared to face it." Then he turned to a group of young people looking at the memorial statue, listening to the guide recount the old story. A child asked, "Grandpa, how do you know who a real soldier is?" Walter smiled, pointing to his heart. "Real soldiers don't need to show off medals. They just need to live true to what they once swore to protect." What did they protect? Not just borders, not just flags, but intangible things: honor, humanity, the belief that sacrifice is never meaningless. A strong society is not measured by the number of armored vehicles or the defense budget, but by the community's moral reflex. When a soldier is humiliated, do we stand up for them? When a value is trampled upon, do we rise up even with just a word, an action, a supportive glance? Walter understood this better than anyone. "I survived the war, but what made me know I was truly alive was when I saw people protecting each other in peacetime. When no one wears a uniform anymore, who keeps the memory alive? The truth is, time will sweep everything away. Old soldiers will pass on. Stories will fade. Flags will fray with the years. But one thing should never be lost, not even subconsciously. There are values that should never be forgotten, even when no one wears a uniform anymore. That value is not in the sound of gunfire, but in respect. Not in regulations, but in conscience. And that is the America that Walter, Jonathan, and millions of other soldiers believed in. Not perfect, but knows how to correct mistakes. Not always right, but knows how to reflect. Not always strong, but knows how to defend what is right. Conclusion. In the small square of Elmswood, there is always a clean stone bench situated beside the memorial plaque. On the back of the bench, an inscription reads, "Not all heroes return, but all heroes deserve to be remembered forever." Walter often sits there, but now he is no longer alone, because now everyone who passes by slows down for a moment, bowing slightly. No one asks them to. But sometimes silence is the loudest voice of gratitude. Thank you for watching the entire video. Don't forget to subscribe for more engaging videos. Thank you.